Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you from around the world. I'm very pleased to see so many people here with us today and welcoming you to IIEP's webinar on Bridging Climate and Educational Planning, Lessons from Cambodia and Malawi. I'm Leonora McEwen, Senior Program Specialist at IIEP, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. I'm going to first pass over to our colleague Fangzhu Liang for some housekeeping matters, and then we'll get right in with IIEP's Director, Martin Benavides. So over to you, Fangzhu.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for connecting to today's webinar, Bridging Climate and Educational Planning, Lessons from Cambodia and Malawi, hosted by IIEP UNESCO. This webinar is taking place as part of the Climate Smart Education Systems Initiative, CSESI, which is founded by the Global Partnership for Education and implemented by UNESCO, IIEP, and Save the Children. While everyone is connecting, I will just go through some housekeeping. First of all, the event is in English with interpretation in French. We invite you to pick your language channel from the start. You can choose your language by clicking on the globe at the bottom of your screen. You can also activate closed captions by clicking on the CC button. The presentations are also available in the two languages of the event. You can download the slides in your language by clicking on the link that my colleagues will post in the chat. Our main channel of communication with you will be by the chat. Please don't hesitate to introduce yourselves and tell us where you're connecting from. If you have any technical questions, you can also ask them there. My colleagues will also be posting messages and links for you throughout the session, so please keep an eye out. Our panelists will be given the opportunity to respond to some of your questions at the end of the event. My colleagues will be collecting your questions throughout the different presentations, so please don't hesitate to add your questions in the chat in English or in French. Finally, please note that this session is being recorded. The recording and presentations will be shared with you after the event. And now I am pleased to hand over to IIEP's Director, Martin Benavides, who will introduce today's session.
Thank you very much, Fanzu, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this important discussion on bridging climate and educational planning. A warm thank you to our partners and distinguished speakers from Cambodia, Malawi, GPE, Save the Children, and UNESCO Section for Education for Sustainable Development for joining us today. As COP30 closed last week, we were reminded once again that education is a powerful enabler of climate resilience and sustainable development. Recent high-level government sessions have legitimized education's integral role in climate strategy, signaling a global shift toward embedding education in climate commitments. Integrating education into climate frameworks ensures that learners and communities are empowered to anticipate risk, adapt to change, and drive sustainable solutions. This means planning for safe and resilient schools, preparing teachers to deliver climate-responsive learning, and ensuring that evidence-based education policies protect the most vulnerable during climate-related crises. At UNESCO IIEP, we work closely with Ministries of Education to strengthen strategic planning and policy development. We have long-standing experience supporting ministries worldwide in crisis and climate-resilient educational planning. Through the Climate Smart Education Systems Initiative, supported by the Global Partnership for Education, the GPE, and implemented jointly with UNESCO, ESD, and Save the Children, we help countries design education systems that are resilient, adaptive, and aligned with climate goals. Our approach emphasizes cross-sectoral collaborations and provide tools, capacity development, and technical support to ensure education is integrated into national climate frameworks, and climate considerations are embedded in education sector policies and plans. We have honored to have today an exceptional panel of speakers with us. Sarah Birmore, Head of Strategic Partnership and Capability at the Global Partnership for Education, GPE. Chipiliro Tombozi, Deputy Director of Planning of Education, Policy and Planning for Malawi's Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. Dan Setarat, Director of the Department of Planning on behalf of Lynn Sotea, Director General of Policy and Planning at Cambodia's Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport, and our value partners, Jennifer Merriweather, Education Specialist, and Jessica Cook, Senior Climate Change and Education Advisor, both from Save the Children, as well as Kathleen Brennan, Project Officer from UNESCO's Education for Sustainable Development section. I will now hand over to Sarah Bermore from GPE. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin, and good morning and afternoon to everyone joining us here today. It's really an honor to be with you to talk about such a critical issue. At GPE, we often say that education is the foundation of every country's future. Well, climate change is testing that foundation more than ever. Around the world, storms, floods, heat waves, and sea level rise are no longer just rare disruptions. They are shaping the everyday reality of learners and teachers around the world. Yet education's not just vulnerable to climate change. It's also one of the most powerful tools that we have to respond to it. When students are learning in safe, resilient schools, when teachers are equipped to understand and teach climate issues, and when communities access the skills they need for a changing economy, we strengthen both human development and national climate ambition. That is why bringing education fully into national climate frameworks is so important. It ensures ministries of education have a seat at the table, that climate action is coordinated across sectors, and that climate finance can flow to where it is needed to protect learning. As a part of our new strategy in 2020, GPE had already identified mid-pandemic that education systems around the world were not well prepared for crisis. Amidst the COVID lockdowns, countries were also grappling with repeated climate change events, and many ministries that we work with were asking GPE to help reinforce their efforts to address its impacts on education. With that, we called for expressions of interest from our partners to work with ministries to mainstream climate change into education sector plans, strategies, and budgets. And with that, UNESCO IIEP, as well as UNESCO's Section for Sustainable Development, Education, and Save the Children, formed a consortium to provide system-wide support on this critical issue. The experiences from Malawi and Cambodia that we're discussing today show what can happen when ministries of education have the tools, the evidence, and the partnerships needed to bridge these two worlds of planning. And as a partner, GPE is so proud to support the work that we're going to be hearing about today. So before we turn to our esteemed colleagues from the countryside to hear about their ground level experience, it may be useful to briefly clarify the two national climate policy instruments that are really shaping this conversation: National Adaptation Plans and nationally determined contributions. So first, with nationally determined contributions, what are they? So they are the core commitments that every country submits under the Paris Agreement. They outline both how a country will reduce its greenhouse gas emissions and how it will adapt to climate change. Now, these NDCs are updated every 5 years, and September this year marked the deadline for the third round of submissions, the NDC 3.0, covering countries' climate commitments through 2035. What's really striking about this new cycle is how many countries now recognize the role of education within these national climate plans. In 2015, for the last NDCs, only 40 countries referenced climate or environmental education in their initial NDCs. But by September this year, that number has grown to 152. Now, this trend reflects a fourfold increase in NDCs referencing climate education, and that's a powerful signal that education is moving closer to the center of national policymaking, and that we may be at the start of a major global effort to make education systems truly climate ready. The other policy instrument that's of extreme importance is the National Adaptation Plans, which set out how a country intends to prepare for and manage the impacts of climate change, from extreme weather to long-term shifts in temperature, rainfall, and ecosystems. And their main goal is to focus on protecting people, services, and systems that are most at risk. So for the education sector, this includes issues like resilient school infrastructure, disaster preparedness, continuity of learning during shocks, and targeting support to the most vulnerable learners. So why is it important that education be included in these national climate frameworks? Well, number one, when education is explicitly included in national climate frameworks, it becomes easier for countries to do three things. First is to formalize their priorities and set clear targets. When education is explicitly referenced in NDCs and NAPs, countries can define concrete goals for climate resilient schools, climate aware curricula, teacher training, green skills development, and making planning more strategic and actionable. It also, number two, helps coordinate across ministries and really strengthen the foundation of cross-sector collaboration. So explicit inclusion of education, it ensures that the ministries of education are actively engaged with environment, finance, disaster risk ministries, fostering a collaboration that really aligns education planning with broader climate strategies. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, including education in climate frameworks really supports access to climate financing for adaptation and capacity building. So by clearly articulating education sector needs in national climate frameworks, countries can then access international climate funds, technical support, and capacity building programs, which help to turn policy commitments into funded, implementable actions. In other words, clear education language transforms climate aspirations into practical pathways for protecting learning and strengthening climate resilience. So, if we want education systems to withstand climate shocks and enable countries to meet their climate ambitions, we need to embed education firmly in national climate frameworks, not as an add-on, but as a core pillar. The work in Cambodia and Malawi, which will be presented in the course of this webinar, really shows what is possible when governments are supported to bridge climate planning and education planning. What happens is we get a little bit closer to ensuring that children everywhere can learn, thrive, and contribute to a more resilient future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your welcoming remarks and for the reminder of the importance of bridging that gap between education and climate. So it is now my pleasure to introduce the country representatives who will share their practical experiences in doing just that, in bridging education and climate planning through the inclusion of education in their NAP, as we'll hear from Mr. Chipolaro Tambozi, the Deputy Director of Education, Policy and Planning from Malawi, and in their NDC, as we'll hear from Mr. Kun Seya, who is the Deputy Director of Planning from the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport in Cambodia. We're really thrilled and honored to have you with us today to kind of demonstrate how the partners together with CSESI, IIEP and the CSESI partners have been working really closely. It's been very much a collective effort to ensure that education is not left behind in these national climate strategies, with the technical support focused primarily on building an evidence base for integrating education into NAPs and nationally determined contributions as well. So the capacity development for the development of climate risk analyses has been foundational, but also the support for the design of climate resilient education sector strategies and operational plans has enabled the inclusion of education in the broader climate plan processes. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over directly to our colleagues from Cambodia and Malawi, who will share for roughly the next 20 minutes or so how this integration has taken place in their respective countries. So over to you, Director Tambozi from Malawi.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Leonora. It's a pleasure for us to share our experience on how we've been trying to integrate education with climate planning. I think our education system is not excluded from the impact of climate change. Over the years, we have seen the education sector being impacted by the climate change. We have floods, persistent droughts across the country, and this has really affected the education. Since 2024, with support from financial support from GPE and UNESCO, we've been working to develop two key documents, which helped the country to build a robust evidence-based foundation for adaptation planning in the education sector. We did the climate risk analysis for the education sector in Malawi, and also developed a consolidated climate change strategy for the education sector in Malawi. And these two documents helped us to negotiate so that education is part of the National Adaptation Plans for Malawi. The risk analysis, why we did the risk analysis, is because we didn't have evidence to justify how climate change affects education. Yes, it was being talked about that education is, but we couldn't quantify it, give data on how this is impacting on education. So we did the risk analysis. So the climate change risk analysis for the education sector, what did the risk analysis do? So with the risk analysis, we identified and mapped climate change stressors and climate hazards in the country and analyzed the nature or historical trends of those stressors. We also assessed the exposure and vulnerability of education systems, schools, how schools are vulnerable, learners and teachers. We also analyzed the effects of climate change, stressors on education in terms of access, quality, management, and equity. And lastly, we also analyzed the existence of capacities to mitigate the effects of climate change. How did we do this? So for us to achieve this, first, we used our data sets, consolidated data sets were consolidated. We analyzed and discussed, including geospatial information. We had a series of participatory workshops and consultation with national and district actors from the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Natural Resources and Climate Change, the Department of Disaster Management. But we also analyzed the data to observe trends in the effects of climate change on access, quality, and management of education with equity mainstreamed across the areas. But also we did a survey on climate change and education across all the 34 education districts in the country. Yeah. Just to highlight the next slide, as you can see beamed there, this is the results from the risk analysis. You can see that from the map, it shows the exposure. As of 2024, more than 50% of primary and secondary schools in Malawi were located in areas classified as having high or very high exposure to floods and droughts, representing approximately 3 million learners. That's about 54% of primary and secondary school learners nationwide. So you can see from the graph that there's a concentration, and almost half of the schools were affected were exposed to the climate stressors. The highest being most districts in the southern region of the country, like Machinga, Chikwawa, Sanje, and Zomba, facing the highest exposure to both floods and droughts. Now, in terms of vulnerability, we use different indicators, as you can see on the screen. So to assess how vulnerable the schools were, we looked at the access to school feeding program as an indicator. We also used another indicator, access to functional water supply. And then we also checked district development and implement districts that had developed and implemented contingency plan for droughts. For floods, we looked at the conditions of classroom and teachers' houses as an indicator. Schools accessible only via earth roads. District developed and implemented a contingency plan for floods. These different indicators allowed us to pinpoint which districts are more or less vulnerable to this and helped us identify some key actions to put in place for the most vulnerable districts. So that we wanted to see which ones are most vulnerable. So we used those indicators. In terms of when we did the analysis, the graph you see, you can see this is the dropout rate. In terms of access, for instance, you can see in the figure here, dropout rates remain consistently high in districts with high exposure to climate hazards. This suggests persistence and interest vulnerability, where climate disruptions seem to affect education outcomes without notable improvements or deterioration. In looking at capacities to mitigate these effects, we found some strengths. For example, the districts that are very highly exposed are more frequently making adjustment to school timetables. Yeah. Similarly, the implementation of other programs like cash transfers and school scholarships also help mitigate the risk of dropout. But the risk analysis showed that those districts that are highly affected, you could see that the dropout rates were consistently high, but also, and this attributed to that kids would drop out like during rain season when you don't have food, the dry season, they would help parents and drop out to search for food. So the dropout rates increase. However, there's still some gaps that exist. As much as we have problems, we have just strengths. In like during these times, schools are able to adjust school timetables. We offer some radio lessons. We have an open a radio for education. We have open distant learning policy, some cash transfers, scholarships. In certain schools, they have school feeding program just to address this. But we also have strategies that have been put in place to ensure that there's equity, like the gender policy and the inclusive education strategy, that so no one is left behind, and ensuring that the learning continues. But still more, there are still gaps that do exist. Like for the inconsistent enforcement of standards, lack of electricity or internet, limited alternative learning, no early warning for droughts. I think this we don't have. In terms of floods, the school feeding is disturbed, when we have drought also. So these gaps still exist. Yeah, so these are just a few examples, but we did carry several analysis for different variables and across other dimensions of education system, like quality, how it affects quality of education, management, and equity on that. So with this evidence that we had from the risk assessment, then we moved to develop consolidated climate strategy for the education sector. So we had the evidence, we had the data, and then we needed to have a strategy. So we used the same to develop the strategy. On developing a consolidated strategy for climate adaptation in the education sector, we followed the steps. The steps were followed. We identify existing strategies and aligning with the NDC priorities. So we were analyzing the policy frameworks that are there, already existing strategies. How do we align with our national education sector investment plan and the national policy frameworks and policies? We then consolidated existing strategies, developed additional strategies, and then priorities, because the other strategies that are there that are already discussing on ensuring that the education continues, and it's but maybe does not really touch on making sure that it's resilient. So we looked at those strategies and then consolidate and develop additional strategies. We then develop a monitoring and evaluation framework with clear indicators, measurable, so that we are able to monitor the strategies and follow if they're being implemented. So we have a monitoring and evaluation framework, and then costed the interventions. Then finally, the strategy was endorsed at all levels, and then adopted. So this is the steps that we followed. Yeah. Just to quickly go into the consolidated the components of our strategy. I would say that the goal of the strategy is to increase continuous equitable access to quality education through adaptive and resilient approaches to climate change by 2030. So here the main components and objectives of the strategy aligns to our national investment plan, but we want to ensure that we have a resilient education system that is providing education equitably across and making sure that access is there. So component one is access and equity. So there, the objective is to strengthen resilience of the Malawian education system for equitable access to education. Here we include adaptive measures for climate resilience in infrastructure, school feeding, and the education continuity. Yeah, so when we have floods, we want to make sure that our infrastructure, we have a resilient infrastructure that can withstand disasters. We have school feeding, how strategies around how to make sure that the school feeding is still going on, and ensuring that even during disasters, the education should still continue. Component two is on quality and relevance. The objective is to ensure quality of education in the context of climate change and disasters. This one covers measures such as remedial lessons, preparedness, teaching and learning materials, supervision and inspection practices, curriculum and teaching training. So here we are looking at the quality of education in the context of climate change and disasters. So we want to make sure that where maybe schools were closed because of some disaster, we can offer remedial lessons and how should this be done. We prepared the teaching itself, provision of learning materials, and then maybe incorporating the we also make sure that we strengthen the change to purpose. So it covers school safety, use of climate-related education data, coordination, financing for climate and education, and integrating climate disaster management in HR. So these are the components of our climate change strategy. Now, what we had been struggling with was the integration of education in the Malawi Adaptation Plan. I think for long we've tried, but education was never appearing as a priority in our NAP in the country. This process coincided with the review of National Adaptation Plan for Malawi. And when we approached the Ministry of Natural Resources and Climate Change, they said we had already done a risk analysis for the other sectors. I think it was health, agriculture, and should be water. And they said for us to justify inclusion of education in the NAP, we need to have done a risk analysis, and that part we've already passed. So we say no, we already did for our sector. So we have a risk analysis which is detailed enough, but we also have a strategy that has identified what we want to do to address the gaps and the challenges that the risk analysis has identified. So it wasn't difficult for us because we already have the tools and the frameworks that needed us to lobby with the ministry to be included in the NAP. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you will note that we have the three components, and I've tried to ensure that the activities presented in the NAP are as comprehensive as possible. So from the strategies that we developed, we were told that yes, you have a sector strategy that addresses your challenges in the sector in as far as climate change is concerned. But what we want you is to reprioritize those ones so that we have broader issues. So we have three areas: access and the equity, So we had the three components, and to ensure that the activities presented in the NAP are as comprehensive as possible. The first component, the access and equity, includes the content on the infrastructure, social protection, and education continuity. So we couldn't put everything that's in the strategy transfer it to the NAP, but we tried to reorganize it, but so that we don't miss the components that we have, but make them a little bit broader. So we had the access and equity. Under that, we have strengthened school infrastructure. Here we are trying to ensure that we have school buildings that are safer and resilient against climate impacts, ensures a secure learning environment. I think we have had a big impact on the infrastructure. I think we had cycle friendly, a lot of infrastructure were developed, and we had some wins. In certain parts of the country, loose blown off. I think the impacts have been devastating. So we're saying through this strategy, we want to make sure that our infrastructure is resilient, so that we don't have this, because it's costly for us to maintain and rehabilitate. We also looked at the education continuity in emergencies. There we are making sure that there's continuous learning during emergencies, protect students from disruptions caused by climate events. When we had the Cyclone Freddy, in those areas affected, schools were closed, but in other parts of the country, learners were still going to school. So we want to find strategies on how best we ensure that even in emergencies, there are alternative ways of providing education, so that in those areas, learning shouldn't stop, but continue. Social protection measures, programs like universal school feeding and rainwater harvesting, supporting vulnerable learners and promote equity. As I said, we have school feeding programs across the country. So to ensure that these are not affected, then promoting inclusive education, ensuring that supporting marginalized learners, foster equitable access and participation in education for all. This was costed, and these strategies costed an estimated total of 9.4 million US dollars, sorry. 9.4 million US dollars. So these have been costed, and this is the total cost if we are to implement the strategies. On quality and relevance, we are looking at remedial learning programs, strengthen remedial education for schools affected by disaster to maintain student progress and learning continuity. As I said earlier, in certain schools, when you have maybe floods, schools are closed, and we need to make sure that the proper remedial programs are implemented, so that the learners do catch up on the missed work as they prepare the school calendar. Here we also are looking at preparedness and flexibility, enhance disaster preparedness with drills and flexible school timetables to adapt to climate adaptation. Teaching materials availability, in terms of disasters, teaching and learning materials are damaged, but how quickly should this be replaced? Digitizing curriculum to ensure consistent access to learning resources. So these are some of the strategies that are there. On climate change integration in training, we're trying to integrate climate education in teacher training to build knowledge and resilience among educators. I think with the support that we got from GBE, we also did the review on the curriculum for teacher training, but also curriculum for primary education is going under review. We had support, technical support to look at the curriculum, to ensure that it takes on board issues of climate change, integrate climate change at both levels, for learners and then the teachers, but from the teacher education schools. So this one also costed, and roughly it's coming to $11.5 million for us to implement the strategies. On governance and management, we have strengthened governance frameworks, focusing on institutional frameworks and accountability to support climate adaptation in education, disaster risk management plans, development of school and district level disaster risk management plans for education sectors. We also have climate data integration, integrating climate-related indicators into education management information system for timely decision making. So we are looking at our education management information system. We look at it. We need to ensure that the data that we collect also has the climate-related data, so that the decisions can be made across the education sector based on the availability of data. So we look at the data collection tools, our questionnaires. Do they have those climate-related data? And the reports that are produced, are they talking to the elements on climate? So we want to ensure that that is part of our data that the sector is collecting. And lastly is the capacity building and funding. Capacity building for educators and dedicated climate education funds ensure effective implementation. I think we've heard about climate change and all that, and we might assume that people know. I think when we started this work, there was a small training that was done just to take us through the what climate change is. So we were learning when that happened. So we may assume we know, but we don't know. So it's very important that the educators are trained to understand what climate change is, and then we need the funding to support all these elements. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Director Tombozi, for this deep dive really into the process that's been used, and even into some of the content of what's included in Malawi's NAP related to education. We're going to turn now to Deputy Director Kunsea from Cambodia to hear about their experience including education in the country's NDC earlier this year. And then we'll come back to some more reflective questions for both you, Mr. Tombozi, and Mr. Saya. Over to you, Mr. Saya.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, I am Mr. Kuziha, the Deputy Director of Department of Planning. I'm here on behalf of my Excellency Director General of Directorate General of Policy and Planning on the topic of integrating education into Cambodia, nationally determined contribution NDC 3.0. See here in this presentation, I'll focus on the progress. Yeah, and this is the main content I would like to cover in the presentation. Regarding the first point is about the growing climate threat to Cambodia education system. This is the background information. As you can see that between 1990 and 2022, Cambodia experienced 37 major climate related disaster, and also we have flood, drought, typhoon, directly affected nearly 24 million Cambodian total over this time, and causing damage to almost 2.5 billion US dollar. So these recurrent shocks increasingly disrupt learning continuity, and it compromises school safety, infrastructure, and affects student and teacher well-being. And to better understand these growing climate threats, the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport conducted climate risk analysis for the education sector with technical support from IIEP, UNESCO, Paris, through the Climate Smart Education System Initiative, namely CSESI. As our colleague from Malawi highlighted, the risk analysis process follow similar approach in Cambodia. This involved first by identifying the key climate stressors, including heat, flood, drought, and strong winds. And then after the analysis, we assess the exposure and the vulnerability of our school, teacher, and student to those hazards. And then we also examine how the risks affect access, quality, school management, and equity matter. And then finally, we review the existing capacity within the education system to understand how prepared we are to deal with not only to deal with, but also to mitigate this impact. And the evidence gave us clear national picture of climate risk in education sector and inform both our planning and our engagement in the national climate process. So that is the example regarding the system exposure. And here I'll use the heat stress as an example to showcase the exposure and vulnerability of a Cambodia education system to climate hazard. In recent decades, Cambodia has experienced a consistent warming trend, which increasing of. We have the report of extreme heat events. In April last year, we faced one of the most intense heat wave on record, most severe in over 170 years. So this result in the critical health warning and widespread concern over the effect of on the public service and including education sector. As you can see in the left graph, high heat exposure is more prominent in densely population regions such as Mekong Lowland and Central Plain. This widespread exposure underscore the growing threat that heat stress opposed to educational continuity and student well-being, especially during the hottest month. So according to the risk analysis, over 1.6 million learners and over 44,600 school staff. It means it is nearly 1 in 2 learners and school staff in the country attend NT in school in the area. It classifies as having high and or very high exposure to heat stress. They are stretched, across more than 6,100 schools, and it already represents 45% of all schools in Cambodia. The figure, this sizable figure indicate that heat is the major climate stressor affecting education system in Cambodia. And as Cambodia is experiencing the steady rise in both average and extreme temperature, with projection showing significant increase in the number, and it's dangerously hot day over the coming decades. This intensifying heat stress threaten to undermine health, school attendance, and learning. So that is quite serious. For the, despite the increasing risk posed by rising temperature associated with climate change in Cambodia, the high level of exposure to heat stress across the education system just described, many schools are not well equipped to cope with this condition. For example, as on the left graph, so although the availability of fans or air conditioner in classroom play an important role in reducing heat stress and improving student and teacher concentration and comfort, large proportion of school in high heat exposure district lack of cooling equipment. In this area, learners face a compounding risk of extreme heat and inadequate classroom environment. Given Cambodia's rising temperature and projected increase in dangerously hot day, the absence of cooling infrastructure in school represent a critical gap. And regarding clean water access is also essential for hydration, hygiene, and heat endurance. Dehydration is a major concern during the hot months, especially among younger children. As the right graph shows, despite the consistent effort by the Ministry of Education in expanding availability of clean water in school in the last year, several districts in high and or very high heat exposure still lag behind. So that's what I can say. This impact are not theoretical. They are already being felt in our school today. During the heat wave in May 2024, temperature exceeds 40 degrees across many provinces. The Ministry of Education had to advise to all schools to shorten study hours or temporarily suspend class to protect student health. In some cases, students study with wet towel to keep them cold, as you can see in this picture. And school chose to spray water on the building to reduce the indoor temperature. As you can see here, that this picture we got from the media. So, answering to the question, why does Ministry of Education need to engage in climate planning? We can say that the heat wave are just one example of the climate pressure affecting school. The national risk analysis confirmed that climate hazard, whether flood, heat stress, storm, or drought, are increasingly disrupting access to education, student safety, teaching condition, and school infrastructure across the nation. Meanwhile, education can contribute to long-term resilience through knowledge, skill, and preparedness. So these gave the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport of Cambodia a strong rationale to participate more actively in national planning. Many of the measures required to protect learning and ensure system resilience are already part of the education strategy. For example, our latest Education Strategic Plan 2024-2028 explicitly integrate climate change and environmental sustainability across various strategies. But despite this, this measure had not been fully reflected in the national and environmental plan and strategy such as NDC. As a result, education contribution was not always visible, and the opportunity for climate financing remained limited. And that is why the Ministry of Education have to engage more proactively in the NDC 3.0 process to ensure that education is recognized as the central Cambodia climate adaptation effort. Regarding Cambodia NDC development process, NDC are a country's self-defined national pledge to reduce national emission and adapt to the impact of climate change adaptation. It is submitted every 5 years with each update required to be more ambitious than the previous one. For the case of Cambodia, it is led by the Ministry of Environment and adopt the whole of government approach to ensure broad engagement in setting target and action. 2025 this year is the time of the third round of updated NDC, and that NDC are required to be submitted. So here is the overall national process, as you can see for NDC 3. Cambodia follow structured approach coordinated by the Ministry of Environment. So this timeline, as you can see, have the Ministry of Education position itself and prepare a sector-specific contribution, especially during the sectoral meeting and consultation workshop. Yeah. So responding to the question, how did the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport engage in the NDC 3.0 process? The ministry used an evidence-based, and policy-aligned approach. We review NDC 2.0 by mapping the existing education measure and access where updated are needed. And interestingly, we conducted the technical review of education sector related policies since NDC 2.0, including the Education Strategic Plan 2024-2028, and also the Teacher Policy Action Plan 2024-2030. We also review education-related content in the NDC 2.0 and assess the alignment with the latest education sector-related policy. We also draft and propose new education measure for adaptation and environmental sustainability. We also participated in the national consultation and technical meeting that led by the Ministry of Environment. And we also coordinated internally with relevant Ministry of Education technical department to validate the proposed input. So in recently, in March 2025, with the support of IIEP, the ministry hold a national consultative workshop to prepare input for the NDC 3.0. And the workshop, gathered 36 participants, including educational officer from various technical departments in the ministry. We have the climate focal point, development partner to come together and identify strategy to ensure for the alignment of education with national climate goal and action. Regarding key result of what changed from NDC 2.0 to the current NDC 3.0. The role of Royal Government of Cambodia has officially submitted the NDC 3.0 in July this year already. As presented in this table, due to the engagement of the ministry, the education sector will lead 6 adaptation and enabling measures covering school infrastructure, safe and eco school, curriculum, teacher training, and planning. We also contribute to other 5 measures on social protection, child protection, food system, and also public information. So here we can say that the role of education sector has been significantly strengthened compared to the previous cycle. First, the adaptation measure on school infrastructure is now much more detailed. Instead of the general commitment, NDC 3.0 specify climate resilient construction and retrofitting standard tailored to the local geographic condition. So this gives us clear direction for implementation. Second, curriculum reform are now more ambitious. Climate education, which previously focused on primary level, expanded to both primary and secondary with the alignment of the new education strategic plan and also the national green curriculum framework. Third, teacher training has been fully mainstreamed. Rather than isolated training session, climate resilience is now integrated into both pre-service and in-service teacher education in line with the teacher policy action plan. We also see a stronger focus on system-wide resilience with safe school and eco school, included to support safety and to ensure continuity of learning and environmental sustainability. Again, non-formal education has also been strengthened with updated curricula on green competency delivered through lifelong learning center. And finally, these measures are now better aligned with the national education policy, and it allows the Ministry of Education to position to contribute to more effectively across multiple sectors. So overall, NDC 3.0 represent a significant step forward in integrating education into Cambodia climate response. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to more discussion regarding what I do in the presentation here. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Sea, for your presentation and the deep dive into how Cambodia has integrated education into the NDC. We are going to just quickly delve a little bit deeper for both of you with one follow-up question, and then we'll hear from our colleagues at Save the Children and the UNESCO section for Education for Sustainable Development. But I think one thing that has come out clearly is that there are specific capacities that are needed and that are important for this engagement with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Climate Change, or the Ministry of Environment in the case of Cambodia. So I was wondering if you could both kind of shed some light on, from your perspective, what some of those specific capacities are. What helped the Ministry of Education in order to kind of collaboratively contribute to that climate planning process, the NAP in Malawi and the NDC in Cambodia? Were there specific capacities that really enabled that engagement? And I think this could be, interesting to hear from other participants as well that are engaging and want to engage in this process. So I don't know, Director Tambozi, would you like to take a stab at sharing some of the key capacities that were important for your ministry in order to engage with the climate adaptation planning process?
Thank you very much. As Elia presented, that for us to be able to be considered as one of the priority sectors in the National Adaptation Plan, there were a number of things that we did, and I think first we needed to understand the processes of the NAP, um, so that the close coordination with the Ministry of Natural Resources and the relevant departments was very instrumental. And that has showed us that we need to have proper coordination structures where you meet, you discuss issues, you understand, because you move on the same wavelength. So the understanding, the coordination is very important capacity that needs to be enhanced. Two, there's technical capacities that you need to have. The analytical ability, the risk assessment really helped us. We did the analysis of how the assessments, the analysis, the data provision that gives evidence of how education is affected, and we're able to develop the plan. So you need those technical and analytical capacities for you to be able to analyze data, interpret it, make a story. Planning and policy integration, the capacities. I think those are the core capacities that I would say you need to have as a ministry. And then I think the issues of costing and budgeting, you need to have all those, because those capacities are very, very, very important. So I think those two are very key capacities that the ministries need to have. The coordination structures, very vibrant ones, and then the technical and the analytical capacities that you'll be able to interpret data, develop policies and strategies that can be shared. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Director Tambozi. Director Seha, from Cambodia's side, what were some of the key capacities that kind of enabled the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports to engage in the NDC process?
Thank you so much for the question, because the first question regarding capacity is important, because I used to come across with one book published by my lecturer at IIEP. The book titled "Without Capacity, There is No Development" by Anton. And for our Cambodia experience, I can say that we can group into three types of capacity. The first, yes, I also agree with Mr. Tambozi regarding the analytical capacity, because that is the starting point in order to formulate the plan regarding climate change. We have the necessity, or stronger need to have the first one is the analytical capacity, and the Ministry of Education really need the ability to understand how climate hazards affect student learning, teacher teaching performance, and also school infrastructure. Climate change seem to me, not only to me, it's a new topic. So climate risk analysis, we have conducted for Cambodia. We got the support from IIEP, UNESCO, and which greatly strengthened our capacity to speak about evidence that demonstrate the effect of climate change that have on education. So this kind of analytical capacity need to be institutionalized. And it not just one report, but it is an ongoing function within the Department of Planning. And the second one, I will go to the technical capacity to engage in the climate planning process. So all education-related officers have to be familiar with climate framework, such as NDC or NAP, National Adaptation Plan, and to understand where the education fits. So this helps us to, identify appropriate entry point, which, measure aligned with the curriculum, school safety, or teacher training. And last but not least, it is also similar to what our presenter from Malawi, that regarding the capacity on coordination and communication. That effective climate planning require, it had a strong need to have continuous dialogue across the ministry and also within the technical department. So education officer must be able to articulate sector need to their counterpart in environment, in finance. Yes, you already mentioned about the costing, disaster management, and all. So that is the capacity, the ability to cost measure, to define realistic target, and to make sure that we can provide evidence in a format which is relevant to a climate planner. So to sum up, I can say that again, we need three kind of capacity. One is the analytical, the second one is technical, because as I mentioned earlier, that the topic of climate change is so new to us. And last but not least, it is about coordination and communication among stakeholders. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And it's really interesting to see some of the similarities in the capacities across the context that were necessary. Early and sustained involvement with the climate planning processes, having those specific analytical and technical skills, whether it's to analyze risks to the sector or to cost measures for climate adaptation. And then, of course, that all-important cross-sectoral and internal coordination also within the ministry, which have played a key role in both of the processes that you've presented. Thank you very, very much, gentlemen, for your presentations and for responding to the questions. I'll ask that you please stay because I see that there are many questions coming in from the chat, and colleagues that are listening, please do not hesitate to put your questions on the chat. We won't have time perhaps to go through them all, but we'll do our very, very best. Towards the end of the webinar, we're coming to the next section of our webinar, which will be involve presentations from Save the Children and from UNESCO's section for sustainable development. So I'm going to turn over to Jess Cook and Jennifer Merriweather from Save the Children, and they'll speak to some of the global guidance that has come out with Save the Children around engaging education and including education in NAPs and NDCs. So over to you, colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Leonora. I will start and then pass to Jess. So hi, everyone. It's great to be here to present on a new report from Save the Children and the NAP Global Network, Education and National Adaptation Plan NAP processes, which has been supported by the Global Partnership for Education and Irish Aid. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes today outlining some of our key findings in terms of meaningful progress and opportunity to strengthen education sector integration into the NAP process, and then some key recommendations from the report. So next slide. So our report shows how countries are starting to prioritize education in their NAP processes. So what did we do? We analysed 62 multi-sectoral NAPs that were submitted to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, by 30th of June 2025, and 106 Green Climate Fund readiness proposals. And we looked at how they integrated the education sector and included children and youth. So next slide. So what were our findings? If we could just have the next slide, please. Thank you. So what are some of the strengths that came out of our analysis of NAPs? So in really great news, 98% of NAPs mention education or educational institutions, and 84% include an education-related priority or actions. Most NAPs focus their education-related priorities on integrating climate change into the curriculum, and 94% of NAPs also mention children and youth. So this is really great news, and as we've been talking about on this webinar so far today, demonstrates really a growing acknowledgement of the importance of the education sector in national adaptation planning processes. So next slide. What are some opportunities to build on from what we found? So first of all, more can be done to integrate the education sector throughout the NAP process. So for example, we found that only 40% of NAPs include the education sector in the impact, risk and vulnerability assessment, which highlights an evidence gap when it comes to understanding the impact of climate change on the sector. And we've heard today how important that evidence has been in terms of integrating education into climate change planning and processes. As most NAPs also focus on curriculum in their education priorities or actions, there's an opportunity to build on this foundation and take a more holistic approach to education adaptation priorities. So considering things like resilient school infrastructure, educational continuity and school safety, and gender equity and social inclusion in education adaptation priorities. And likewise, although NAPs mention children and youth, very few included evidence that they consulted with children and youth in the development of the NAP. So involving children and youth in the NAP process will help ensure their unique priorities and needs are heard and addressed. So next slide, please. Just two final opportunities to strengthen that I wanted to highlight. So first of all, as we've heard today as well, education ministries need to be engaged throughout the process. So many NAPs include the education ministry as an implementing actor, which is a really strong starting point, but not in other areas such as planning or coordination, which is also critical. And finally, costings. So only 27% of NAPs currently include cost estimates for their education priorities or actions. And as we've been talking about today, accurate costings are a really important step in accessing climate finance. So next slide, please. So I'm about to just talk about some of our recommendations, but before I do that, and while I do that, I'd like to ask you to fill out this Mentimeter. So following this report, we will be developing some follow-up guidance to support education and NAP lead ministries in integrating the education sector into NAP processes. I would love to hear from you about what guidance and resources would support you in your role to integrate education into the NAP process. So you can use the QR code, or the code for the Mentimeter will be popped in the chat as well. So just follow that link and please have your say. So next slide, please. So in terms of where to next, what are the implications of these findings? So our report makes a number of recommendations. Just to highlight a couple, for NAP teams, we recommend involving and coordinating with the Education Ministry, integrating the education sector throughout the NAP process, and ensuring education adaptation priorities are costed, among others. And for education ministries, we recommend to also strengthen collaboration with NAP teams, but also to be a strong voice for the education sector on adaptation through engaging and coordinating with a range of education actors, and to ensure alignment between the NAP process and education policies, plans, and budgets. So next slide has just got our link to the full report, which I encourage you to read. It goes into more details. And I can see just some quick results from our Mentimeter that people are really interested in climate finance for education adaptation and education adaptation planning. So thank you for filling that out. That will be really helpful in terms of forming our guidance. And just a final note, so we're seeing really great progress when it comes to considering the education sector into NAP processes by strengthening coordination between NAP teams and education ministries and addressing some of the other key gaps that our report highlights. NAP processes can support education systems to adapt to climate change. This will protect the lives, well-being and education of children. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Jess to talk about nationally determined contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name's Jess. I'm a Senior Climate Change and Education Advisor with Save the Children. And many thanks to all the panelists so far for sharing concrete examples of how to include education in climate policies. I will very briefly share a guidance tool written by Save the Children and GPE, which aims to reinforce the capacity of Ministries of Education and the wider education sector in engaging in nationally determined contribution. And this guidance aims to ensure both the needs, but also the powerful agency of students, teachers, their communities are really at the heart of climate action and financing decisions. So on the next slide, you can see that every 5 years, countries must update their NDCs as part of the Paris Agreement. And the current round 3 for most countries, are in the process of being submitted across this year. And these plans include commitments that will be implemented over the next 10 years, right up to 2035. So if we think about children who are just starting elementary school this year, they'll be finishing school by 2035. And children born directly today will be 10 years old by then, right in the middle of their education. An education that we know must be resilient to the numerous shocks that extreme weather will create. And so it's therefore really encouraging to see increasing number of countries recognizing education in their NDCs. The next round of updates will be in 2030 and will go to 2040. So in the next slide, we have been through developing this guidance. We've heard from Ministries of Education and Environment some of the challenges that they are currently overcoming, ranging from limited coordination across different line ministries to competing sector priorities, to the education sector simply not being invited to the table sometimes. And not only that, but education can be limited to climate literacy, overlooking education continuity and resilience. And we saw from Director Tom Bosey the comprehensive approach that Malawi has taken, for example, in their NAP. And this means education can be overlooked in both climate action, but also in terms of climate financing. So this guidance really aims to provide some direction to help overcome these challenges. And as we've heard already, including education in NDCs is important to both improve opportunities to secure climate finance towards education, but also additional support in terms of capacity, etc. So this guidance supports you no matter where your country is in updating their NDC. So the guidance is unique to where your country is, with many countries now turning towards implementation. So on the next slide, you'll see the steps, which are fairly straightforward. You can go through all of these in one. So the steps are to find out what is actually in your NDC currently, who is leading the NDC, and how are you going to coordinate that with them. And we've heard this from the importance of coordination from Kunsea just now in Cambodia. We also need to determine where you would include education, identifying key targets, indicators and actions so that it's measurable, and identifying if domestic finance is available, and if not, how these activities will be funded. The guidance also provides example messaging, rationale for including education, indicators, and links to further resources. If you go on to the next slide, there are some excellent examples of countries systematically include education in their NDCs, with more coming in all the time. And just this morning, I was reading Costa Rica's updated NDC, where education has been comprehensively included across it. So updated NDCs are coming and must deliver policies based on updated science that are more ambitious, more innovative, drive further action, and engage more stakeholders, like in education. So what is more innovative and ambitious than supporting children with a funded policy that includes climate smart education, that ensures continued access to education, and involves and capacitates the next generation to take climate action? Thank you very much, and you'll be able to find the guidance in the chat and on the links.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jess and Jen, for sharing this really important guidance with everyone that's been listening. So colleagues, you have the link and you have the contact information also for Jess and for Jen. So thank you very, very much. We'll now turn to Katie Brennan from UNESCO's section for sustainable development to speak a little bit about how they are working to monitor and evaluate climate action through the Greening Education Partnership platform. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you. My name is Kathleen, or Katie Brennan. I work in the section of Education for Sustainable Development at UNESCO. Thank you again, IIEP colleagues, for organizing today's webinar and giving the ESD section an opportunity to speak about the work we are doing to monitor climate action education globally and at the country level. We can move on to the next slide, please. I would like to briefly start by placing the work of the section of ESD. The section of ESD hosts the Greening Education Partnership and acts as its secretariat. The Greening Education Partnership was launched at the UN Transforming Education Summit in September 2022 as one of the 6 global education initiatives to respond to the mounting urgency of the twin challenges posed by climate change and the need to transform education under the UNESCO's ESD for 2030 framework. It's a global initiative to deliver strong, coordinated, and comprehensive collaboration on climate change education within the framework of ESD. Drawing upon ESD's holistic approach to learning, the Greening Education Partnership aims to strengthen countries' capacity to provide quality climate change education and green every aspect of learning. The partnership is organized around these 4 pillars of action we call greening schools, greening curriculum, greening teacher training and education systems capacity, and greening communities. If you could please move to the next slide. Thank you. Since its creation, the Greening Education Partnership has established itself as an inclusive platform and community of practice. It aims to boost collaboration and create synergies among global partners around its 4 pillars of action. As of today, 97 countries and over 1,900 stakeholders are members of the partnership, and this includes 11 UN agencies. For the working group activities around the 4 pillars, there are 3 co-leading organizations for each working group. Each working group delivers guiding documents around each of its pillars to support the mainstreaming of its targets, as well as establishing indicators and to track and monitor progress. Through the partnership, members discuss the key issues that need to be addressed under each action area, setting up common objectives and goals, developing global norms and standards, conducting global communication and advocacy for greening education agenda, and exploring opportunities for collaboration among all of its members. Most relevant to today's conversation is our Pillar 3, the Greening Teacher Training and Education Systems Capacity, which does 2 things. 1, it strives to equip educators with the knowledge, skills, and pedagogical capacity to integrate climate change and sustainability into teaching and learning. 2, it transforms entire education systems through policy, planning, funding, governance, and institutional standards so that education as a whole becomes climate smart, resilient, and sustainable. Nationally determined contributions play a critical and important role in tracking progress under this pillar, as they provide clear, country-driven commitments, as we saw today, that reflects how education can be integrated into national climate strategies. By monitoring the inclusion of NDCs, we can better understand the extent to which countries are prioritizing climate action across their education system. As you can see on the screen, the exact target is not yet set for Pillar 3, and it's still under discussion from its members of the JEP community. The publication, Educators at the Heart of Greening Education, a climate resilient toolkit for policymakers, will be launched soon, so please stay tuned, and this will be coming under its working organization of Pillar 3. If you could please move on to the next slide. To support the development of tracking and monitoring actions Our members have asked and expressed an interest to develop a platform that provides a holistic view of how countries, organizations, and partners are integrating climate action into policy and practice. As we collect new insights and resources, the platform will continue to grow to support the global movement towards greening education. We're taking a phased approach to the platform's development. The platform will have a home page. We'll be able to track global progress towards the 4 pillars of action, as well as country profile pages. The example here on the screen is of Brazil. In the first stage of our development, we'll have country profiles for JET members, which will include Cambodia, and later we will have Malawi as well, which will be displayed onto our dashboard. The platform will take links to data collected and other initiatives emerging from CSESI. If a country is a CSESI country, it will be displayed and identified within the country profile page. Users will also be able to learn more about CSESI by being directed to the GPE website itself. So these country profile pages really become an important space to showcase commitment and implementation to enable knowledge sharing and cross-facilitation among countries. The country profile pages are a space to collect information directly from countries, data collected from the JEP Secretariat, and research from partners. Users can see directly where the information is coming from when they hover over the mouse. As you can see on the screen now, the MEES project, that's when you hover over, you'll be able to see exactly where that point is coming from. So if we can move on to the next slide, we'll do a quick dive into Pillar 3. So taking a closer look at Pillar 3, the greening teacher training and system capacity, you'll see that information is taking, again, that holistic approach. The platform will be a place where data and information are collected from different organizations, countries, and researchers to provide an in-depth analysis and picture of greening education around various topic areas, and further awareness to peer learning and education in NDCs and NAPs. So on the screen, you can see the inclusion of education in countries' NDCs will be displayed through an analysis of multiple partners to enable that full picture. The bold, limited inclusion on the screen is based on analysis conducted by earthday.org. Earthday.org uses a 3-category system based on the level of inclusion to evaluate the extent and quality of education-related commitments, such as incorporating climate education into formal curricula, supporting training, engaging local communities, and fostering youth leadership. The data point on NDCs on the platform will mirror exactly what the analysis was done on earthday.org. So for example, this is under category 2, which meaning that the NDC mentions climate education and has programs in non-formal education settings, but no mention of integration into curriculum. So users will be able to hover their mouse over a topic area to see where it's coming from. So a user will be able to directly go to the earthday.org's website to further understand their analyses, as well as to link directly to the country's NDC for their own further self-research. We also have done survey responses to countries. We've asked several countries yes/no questions and provided short answer responses for them directly onto the platform. So the Learn More buttons at the bottom of the page will allow users to read directly from countries on their initiatives related to building system capacity and teacher training. We can move on to the next slide, please. We are also working with JEP members, the MEES project, who have recently published a brief during the COP30 on the level of inclusion of education in national curriculum frameworks, which is part of helping monitor our Pillar 2. In that same brief, includes an analysis of 166 countries on the level of inclusion of education training content in NDCs. Their findings show that 63% of countries in the study include at least low levels of education training content in their NDC, with 0% having a significant level of inclusion and 13% of countries making no reference to education training in their NDCs. This analysis also further looks at the level of inclusion within content areas. Again, looking at general education, pre-primary, secondary, higher education, general training, TVET, and teacher training content. So we're working closely with the MEES project, who is a JEP member, on incorporating this analysis onto the NDCs, onto our country profile pages. We are also working with JEP member Christina Kwok at the Clean Help Desk to include her timely report on the platform, as well as develop how to visualize her findings on our platform. The report provides stakeholders with a baseline against which to measure country progress on their commitments, the Declaration on the Common Agenda for Education and Climate Change at COP28. You can move on to the next slide, please, and our last slide. The platform is designed as an inclusive space which partners can showcase their work. Like the JEP, it depends on the contributions of its members. Together, these analyses offer a consolidated information base on how education is or is not being integrated into climate action and to what extent and what level it is included. Each partner brings their own lens and varying perspectives, methods, and analyses for tracking, assessing innovative measures, and addressing greening education. By bringing these perspectives together around even just one topic area as we discussed today, will enable policymakers, researchers, and partners to better assess country progress through a whole of system approach. Users can also explore data in a greater depth with direct links that will direct them to partners' websites and additional resources. Again, we see this as a living, evolving platform that will continually be updated and refined. This is why we're taking a phased development approach, and we aim to have a fully developed platform by COP31. Again, we ask on our partners, if you would like to contribute your research inputs, submit a news article or best practice, please contact the JEP Secretariat directly at jep@unesco.org. Thank you for your time, and it was very inspiring to be a part of today's conversation, and that's all I have for you today. So thank you so much, and back over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that wealth of information and for the opportunity too for colleagues that have been listening to us to send you some of the key impact stories that are emerging as increasingly education is working with climate actors and on climate adaptation in the education sector. We have unfortunately surpassed the amount of time allocated for this webinar, but I would like to take the time if Director Tambozi and Director Seha would allow to cover kind of two key questions that have emerged in the chat. And of course, we've taken note of your questions there and we're responding as we can directly in the chat. But to really kind of maximize and learn from the experience in Malawi and in Cambodia, I'd like to ask both colleagues two questions. One is related to how countries and whether or not countries have been successful in securing budget allocation for the climate aspects that are within their education sector plans or with their consolidated strategy, as the case in Malawi or their operational plan in Cambodia, either from the Ministry of Education or from the Ministry of Finance. So the question around like how to ensure that there are sustainable financing frameworks in place so that the actions that have been developed in consultation with multiple stakeholders can actually be institutionalized and implemented. So that's one question for both colleagues. And then the other question relatedly is around the inclusion of gender equality and inclusion within the analyses and within the climate adaptation measures. So I don't know, perhaps Director Tambozi, would you like to take a stab at those questions? And then we can turn to Director Seha.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll start with the financing framework. I think the most sustainable way is to include this to be funded by the government budgets, the medium-term framework. So for the ministry, I think our work of developing the strategy, the risk analysis has just coincided with the review of our the National Education Investment Plan. So the works from the risk analysis will feed into the National Investment Plan, which will in turn be costed, and that's how the educational sector is financed. Because what we want is to ensure that climate change is highly visible in our national investment plan. When we have that in our national investment plan, government support, financing, targets achieving, supports achieving of those targets. Our development partners looks at the national investment plan. Their support is crafted around the national investment plan. So if we integrate the climate change in our national investment plan, we understand it's a very sustainable framework for resource mobilization. We also trying to develop a resource mobilization framework under the to the this, as I was presenting the plans at district level. We also have those, and that feed into their budgeting processes, and that they are financed across those. These are frameworks that we feel to put in place so that we have sustainable funding and resource mobilization. With regards to equity, issues of gender, I think in our risk analysis, we went further to address how climate change affects women, affect girls and boys. That we were able to differentiate. So that is part of our analysis, and our strategies also have taken up from the analysis and put strategies that ensures that both boys and girls have equal access, so that we ensure there's equity. Yeah, I think that's what I would say on those two questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Tombozi. Over to you, Director Seha.
Thank you very much once again regarding the question on finance. Yes, it's important. That is the sensitive topic. To ensure the sustainability regarding funding, frankly speaking, for Cambodia, regarding the support to climate change or hazard, we got the two important project currently. One is CSESI, and the other one called BRACE. That BRACE come from is the acronym of the building the climate resilience of children and community through the education sector project. That is the project we got from the Save the Children Australia, and also Save the Children International in Cambodia. That are two important initiatives to support climate change. In order to ensure the sustainability, to my understanding and experience, first of all, the ministry as the implementer and also the beneficiary of this project have to learn from the best practice from each project, and then we have to transform it into our action plan for the continuation. In order to get support from the government, for the Ministry of Education, we have to plan carefully with evidence to the Ministry of Economy and Finance every year, so that we can propose for a budget to support in the climate change, because this is new topic. And then in order to have any support, you must have clear analysis. So regarding the support from the project from development partner, that is the good starting point that the ministry can build themselves to become more resilient. That is my response regarding the sustainability. Yes, actually, development partner or support from project will not be forever. So the ministry have to be ready to take over the remaining action. That is, so we must have the smart exit strategy for all the project. Regarding another question on gender or equity, currently Cambodia, the Ministry of Education is having the dissemination. It is called validation workshop regarding gender mainstreaming strategic plan 2028. So that is the 5-year plan to ensure that the ministry as well as the whole government pay great attention to the girl and especially gender. Thank you very much. That is my response.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to everyone, to all of our panelists, from Martine, from Sarah, Jessica, Jen, Katie, and of course, Director Tambozi and Director Seha, thank you very, very much for your time. And also a huge thanks to all of the participants who have been very engaged. We have a plethora of questions, and I see some of our colleagues are doing the best they can to respond to those questions directly in the chat. And if other panelists would like to take the time to do that too, they're very, very welcome to. Please do check out the links to the documents and the different platforms that are available in the chat. And we'll wrap up there just to kind of finish by saying, I think it's been really interesting to hear how the two countries have worked together to include education in their multi-sectoral climate adaptation plans. The importance of aligning with existing education sector plans so that ultimately these measures are covered financially and are actually implemented. The importance of producing an evidence base, as we heard from both colleagues, has really been key, and the need to have specific analytical and technical skills to do that and to cost the different measures have been important. And then last but not least, the importance of investing in that cross-sectoral collaboration, which is a long-term investment that takes time, but that hopefully reaps rewards in moving forward so that climate actors really do see the importance of investing in education for the whole of their country. So a heartfelt thank you finally to all of the speakers again, and to all of you for your experiences and insights. And we really look forward to continuing the dialogue and supporting your efforts in integrating education into climate planning. Thank you very much, everyone. Have nice days, evenings, nights, as it may be.